The hangar lights buzzed faintly in the stillness of the morning, casting long reflections across the polished concrete floor. It was 4:30 a.m., and the air over Joint Base Andrews held that crisp, waiting quiet, the kind that settles just before something breaks. Captain Sarah Whitman moved with practiced purpose. Her boots made no more noise than necessary. She checked the loadout twice, reviewed the flight manifest 3 times. No red flags. No unexpected cargo. No special requests. A simple escort mission. 1 aircraft. 1 passenger. No media. No ceremony. She wore the flight suit like a second skin, not out of vanity, but habit. Her dark hair was tucked into a tight bun. Her sidearm sat snug against her hip. Even at this hour, every button was fastened, every strap secured. She ran her hand down the edge of her tablet, eyes scanning the final pre-flight checklist. The C-12 Huron sat quiet on the tarmac, engines cold, its pale skin catching the soft glow of hangar lights. 2 pilots waited inside, both fresh from a rotation out of Ramstein. Good flyers, steady hands. No one spoke much. There was no security briefing, no escort team. The general hadn't arrived yet, but the mission clock had started ticking. Sarah checked the time again. Just past 4:30. Something about the silence stuck with her. Not the peaceful kind. The other kind. The kind that hums beneath your ribs when your instincts start reaching for details that aren't there. She told herself to ignore it. This wasn't combat. This was transport. Still, something in her stomach didn't buy it. Missions like this didn't feel this quiet unless someone wanted them that way. She had learned to trust patterns, and this one wasn't adding up. She made a final pass through the cabin, brushing her fingers along the secured seat straps, the emergency kits, the overhead storage. Everything looked exactly how it should, and somehow, that was the part that bothered her most. Sarah returned to the tarmac and waited for the general to arrive. Wind pressed against her uniform, the kind of wind that never comes with answers, only warnings. Sarah Whitman grew up near Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, just off a 2-lane road where the wind never stopped moving. Her father, a senior master sergeant, spent most of his career keeping A-10 Warthogs in the air. He never said much about the work. He didn't have to. Sarah watched him scrub oil from his hands every night. Shirt still damp with sweat. Boots never fully clean. Most weekends, he brought her to the hangars. While other kids chased balls or screens, Sarah stood beside metal giants, learning the names of parts and tools before she ever learned multiplication. Her dad taught her the difference between fixing something to make it run and fixing it to make it last. That difference stayed with her. She could have flown fighters. She had the test scores, the reflexes, the nerves. But what interested her wasn't the sound of engines or the thrill of flight. It was what happened before any of that. The way one intercepted call could shift an entire mission. The way patterns hid inside noise, waiting for someone to notice. She chose intel because she was better at seeing what others missed. And because, deep down, she didn't care about being seen at all. In Afghanistan, she worked out of tents with satellite dishes and folding chairs. She spent more nights under floodlights than stars, building target packets on sand-worn laptops, cross-referencing signals, stitching together shadows into maps. Once, during a base attack, she found herself kneeling next to a wounded soldier, his blood soaking through her sleeves. She told him he was going home. Even though they both knew it might not be true, she never forgot his eyes. Not because of fear, because of how much he wanted to believe her. Sarah never thought of herself as brave. She thought of herself as responsible. If something was broken, you fixed it. If something didn't feel right, you checked it again. And if no one else was looking, you still did the job right. She didn't chase credit. She didn't raise her voice. Her father once told her integrity was what you did when no one clapped. She believed that more than anything, even now, years later, She still wiped her boots before stepping into a plane. Even when no one was watching, General Alan Royce stepped onto the aircraft with the kind of presence that made people stand without thinking. His aide, barely out of ROTC, rolled on a sealed Pelican case, saluted stiffly, and disappeared before the engines even spooled up. The man left no trace. Just the faint scent of metal polish and the weight of something classified now secured in the cargo hold. Royce didn't speak at first. He nodded once at the pilots. Another, slightly longer glance at Sarah. Then he took his seat and buckled in with the slow precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He wore the uniform like it belonged to the building more than the man. Everything about him was pressed. Clean. Exact. 4 stars on each shoulder. A row of ribbons that stretched across his chest, like a career written in blood and brass. Sarah had read about him long before she met him. Operation Pacific Sentinel. Joint Strategic Command. A reputation built on calculated force, never waste. He wasn't known for kindness or warmth. He was known for getting things done when no one else could. But even with all that respect in her mind, something about him felt off. Not wrong. Just sealed. Like he had spent so many years making decisions others didn't want to understand. He no longer tried to explain. 30 minutes into the flight, as the sun began to edge across the horizon, Sarah noticed the handset, a black Iridium 9000, 575, military grade. Not part of the issued flight equipment. Not listed in the manifest. He kept it low in his lap, thumb hovering over the keypad. Occasionally he would bring it to his mouth, shielding his voice as if turbulence might eavesdrop. She didn't ask. Not yet. But she saw. She logged the make, model, and lack of registration. Noted that he used his left hand. Despite being right dominant, she watched the glint of the antenna reflect in the cockpit glass. There were reasons a general might use off-manifest gear. Not all of them were bad, but none of them were routine, and Sarah Whitman didn't believe in coincidence. Not at 35,000 feet. Not with a 4-star legend in the cabin. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, steady and familiar. But Sarah's focus had narrowed to something smaller. General Royce sat 5 feet away, angled slightly toward the window, speaking softly into the Iridium 9000, 575 again. She caught fragments. Numbers. Not random. Not idle. Short bursts like 17, 4, north. Then a pause. Then another. She ran them through memory. They didn't match anything on the approved flight plan. She keyed her tablet, pulling up the latest navlog. The aircraft was tracking on course to Hickam. No deviations. But the numbers she just heard pointed west, too far off their route. She checked again. Nothing logged those coordinates. Sarah flipped open the secure manifest on her device. No mention of additional comms gear. The handset wasn't cleared. She leaned back. Checked the Pelican case secured in the rear. Lock intact. RFID tag scanned clean. Weight matched. It should have eased her concern. It didn't. She moved to the back of the cabin, under the pretense of checking cabin pressure indicators. In reality, she pinged the onboard comms node. No response. She tried again using the reserved frequency keyed for encrypted backchannel. Still dead. Royce had ordered comm silence before departure, citing OPSEC. At the time, it made sense. Now it felt like a shield. She returned to her seat. Heart steady, fingers quiet. From her wrist, she tapped the activation pattern on her backup recorder. It was a simple black band device that looked like a fitness tracker, but it logged audio, timestamped it, and monitored frequency interference. Within seconds, it detected signal blocking across 3 ranges: UHF, VHF, and SATCOM burst. Sarah knew better than to panic. She ran protocol in her head. Was there a scenario where this all lined up clean, maybe? But it would take more than coincidence. It would take someone with the authority to keep everyone else quiet. Someone with 4 stars. She glanced at Royce again. He was calm, completely in control, still staring out the window, as if the sky below them was his to shape. She took a breath. Not too deep. Then she started counting seconds between his transmissions, logging what she could, because even in silence, there was always a pattern, and patterns didn't lie. Sarah sat still, eyes fixed on her screen but not reading anymore. Her ears tracked Royce's voice behind her, low and deliberate. Numbers again. A string of coordinates followed by a pause, then a phrase she didn't recognize. She'd heard regional dialects before. Coded phrasing. This wasn't random. These were structured transmissions, and they weren't for any U.S. asset. She double-checked the aircraft systems through the onboard diagnostic panel. The autopilot was engaged, but the GPS input was no longer coming from the standard flight plan. It was running a manual override, a custom nav input. She checked the transponder status. Offline. Disabled 20 minutes earlier. The entry had a digital signature, Royce's. She didn't flinch, didn't change posture. She tapped her wrist device once to engage the encryption layer. It began recording in bursts, compressing snippets of ambient sound and tagging them to her location and time. She raised her canteen to drink. Using the metal surface to catch the reflection of the handset, she waited until the light was right, then snapped a silent photo from her wrist device. The handset, Royce's hand, the coordinate sheet in his lap. This wasn't a violation of procedure. It was something else, something deeper, a betrayal that was still hidden under layers of rank, protocol, and power, and the person orchestrating it had more stars than she had stripes. The weight of that difference pressed into her spine like gravity. She tore a strip of paper from a weathered mission notebook, small enough to fit under her cuff. On it, she wrote 4 things. Handset, not logged. Coordinates transmitted. Transponder disabled. Navigation compromised. If this ended wrong, someone had to find that note. Sarah didn't panic. She ran every mental checklist twice, cross-referenced what she knew with what she could prove. Her thoughts moved clean, sharp, focused. But inside, something heavier was growing. The sense that if she didn't act, no one else would. Royce sat calm across the aisle, still working the handset like it belonged to him, like the sky belonged to him. Sarah felt the chain of command tighten around her like a wire. You don't question a 4-star in flight. You don't accuse without evidence. You don't make noise unless you're sure. But some part of her wasn't asking anymore. It was knowing, and that was when silence started to feel like complicity. Sarah moved down the narrow aisle with slow, even steps. The hum of the engines felt louder than usual, as if the aircraft itself could feel the weight of her decision. She kept one hand on the overhead brace, the other gripping her tablet. She told herself it was just a systems check, just routine, nothing strange, just a captain reviewing descent procedures. The cockpit door wasn't locked. It never needed to be. She stepped in, nodded once to the pilot and co-pilot, asked about fuel levels, cabin pressure, lead path. They answered without suspicion. She pointed to the overhead display and asked for confirmation on a digital readout. As they turned to check, she reached down and keyed the pilot override switch. The cockpit lights dimmed. Screens flickered, and then reset. The autopilot dropped out. The primary flight control locked into emergency protocol. The aircraft was now under her command. A second later, General Royce's voice echoed behind her. Not loud. Cold? Just a single word. Enough to freeze the cabin. She didn't turn around. She reached forward and keyed the descent angle. 45 degrees. Controlled. Fast. She reached for the radio. Still jammed. No time to explain. No one to explain to. Then the first lunge. Royce's shadow hit the glass behind her. His hand grabbed the back of her vest. Tried to pull her from the seat. The pilot shouted. The co-pilot reached to switch back to manual control. But Sarah had already locked them out. She ordered the co-pilot to cut fuel flow from the starboard tank. He hesitated. She raised her voice. Not with panic. With command. He obeyed. Fuel lines hissed as valves sealed. The aircraft groaned as it dropped into descent. Royce slammed into her side, his elbow catching just under her ribs. Pain bloomed. Sharp and hot. Her breath caught, but her hands didn't leave the yoke. She twisted her torso, dug her heel into the floor, shoved backward, enough to break his grip. The altitude warning screamed. Terrain alerts followed. Ocean below. Climbing fast. Sarah's vision narrowed, not from fear, from clarity. She saw the readouts, the heading, the fuel mix. She whispered under her breath. It wasn't a prayer. It was a promise to her father, to the oath she took, to the people who'd never know her name. The co-pilot yelled that they had no pitch control. She told him that was the point. This wasn't about survival. This was about stopping what no one else could. One move, one decision, one life. She kept the descent tight, shallow enough to miss the impact zone on radar, steep enough to make recovery impossible. She didn't close her eyes. She didn't brace. She held the yoke, watched the numbers drop, and chose to fall with purpose. Integrity, she'd once been told, is what you do when no one's watching. And now, with seconds left, it was all she had left to give. Salt burned in her eyes before she even opened them. The pain came next. Slow, heavy, like being pressed into the world by something too big to fight. Sarah's body floated half-submerged. One arm locked around a jagged piece of wing. The other hung limp and wrong. Her uniform was soaked through, streaked dark with blood. Every breath scraped. Her ribs felt cracked. Her mouth tasted metal. Smoke rose in the distance, curling from torn fuselage that still floated in pieces. Flames licked across the surface of the water where aviation fuel hadn't yet burned out. The Pacific rolled slow and wide, too calm for what had just happened. She blinked up at the sky, colorless and open. She coughed, gasped, then whispered the same thing again and again. Did the transmission go through? Her lips barely moved. Her throat cracked with every word, over and over. Did the transmission go through? She drifted in and out. Sometimes the wreckage circled her. Sometimes it faded. Time lost its shape. Once, she thought she saw Royce, his uniform floating upside down near the nose section. She turned away. Later, the sound of blades, low at first, then louder, real, a shape growing against the sky. The rotor wash pushed waves outward as the MH-60 Seahawk hovered, voices above her. Then a splash, hands under her arms. A harness snapped into place. Cold water gave way to air. Up, then hands again. A diver shouting to the crew. A medic pulling gauze tight around her arm, stabilizing her head, checking her pulse. She tried to speak. Couldn't. The words stuck. So he leaned down, close enough for her to hear. The channel was dead. Nothing got through. She let her head fall back. Eyes open. Barely. She stopped fighting the pain. Stopped counting seconds. She let go. The ocean moved below, the sky above, and for the first time in hours, she felt still. Not safe, but still. 3 words circled in her mind like a heartbeat. Nothing got through, and that was enough. The walls were white, the kind of white that never looked clean, just sterile. Sarah lay still in a hospital bed at the Navy Medical Center in San Diego. Her ribs were wrapped, one arm in a sling. A shallow line of stitches ran along her temple. She breathed carefully. Every motion, a reminder that survival carried its own weight. NCIS came the second day, not in a rush. They moved like people who already knew the answer but needed to confirm the details. Wreckage had been pulled from the water. Among the fragments was what was left of a flash drive, scorched black and almost unreadable. Almost. The data was recoverable. Encrypted keys. Fleet locations. Silent communication protocols linked to the Pacific submarine network. Everything Sarah feared. Everything Royce had tried to pass. There was no defense left for him. The man the Pentagon once called untouchable would never stand trial. His name would vanish behind redactions and closed hearings. But in the classified corridors of the Department of Defense, a truth settled in. One officer stopped it. At 30,000 feet, with no backup, no clearance to act, no promise of survival. Her written statement was one page, direct, precise. She wrote what mattered, that integrity has no rank, and that sometimes following orders means knowing when not to. A call came late in the day. A secure line. The president's voice was calm, measured, thankful. Sarah said little, just that she was doing her job. Nothing more. No cameras. No medals. No headlines. Stillness returned in small ways. The way nurses checked her vitals without lingering. The way junior officers walked a little straighter when they passed her door. Not out of ceremony, but something quieter. She slept with the lights off for the first time that night, and in that silence, she let herself believe that what she did mattered, even if no one would ever really know how much. 3 months after the crash, the hall was filled with silence. Not the absence of sound, but the kind that settles in marble and uniforms and breath held tight. Inside the Pentagon, under vaulted ceilings and brass light, Captain Sarah Whitman stood at the front of the room. Her dress blues were crisp. The sling on her left arm had been removed weeks ago, though it still ached in the mornings. Across the polished floor, rows of service members stood at attention. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Guardians, not as spectators, but as witnesses. The president stepped forward. The words were measured and solemn, about sacrifice, about duty, about the cost of doing what is right when no one is watching, and how, because of one woman's choice, lives had been spared and trust had been preserved. When the Medal of Honor was placed around her neck, the weight surprised her. Not just the medal, but what it meant. The room didn't clap. It held still, reverent, the kind of stillness that doesn't ask for applause. Sarah raised her right hand and saluted. Sharp, clean, final. No speech followed. To her right, 2 folded flags rested on dark wooden stands, brass nameplates beneath each. The pilots, they had no chance to choose, but they paid the cost just the same. After the ceremony ended and the room began to empty, Sarah walked to the flags. She placed her hand gently on each one, closed her eyes, whispered what only she could say. They flew true. Then she turned to the bronze wall, names carved deep, line after line. Some she recognized, most she didn't. All of them carried by silence. She stood there for a long time. No music, no words. One tear ran down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away, because some medals are given for valor, some for sacrifice. But this one, she knew, would always belong to the memory of what was nearly lost, and to the quiet truth that real heroes never look for the light, they just stand in it.